Good afternoon, everyone. And at the outset, I would really thank the Chairman Scientific Committee and the organizers for giving this session and this important session. This session deals with corneal catastrophes and corneal emergencies and how every clinician confronts these things in day-to-day clinical practice. As we all know, corneal blindness is one of the significant causes of ocular morbidity in clinical practice, requiring timely interventions.
Sir, sorry.
Ocular trauma, infections.
Please make it full screen, sir.
Am I visible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible. Please make it full screen.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Please make your slide full screen, sir. I mean slideshow.
Okay. So, apart from the major clinical emergencies like ocular trauma, infections, chemical burns, graft rejections, corneal meltings, everything has to be dealt over here in a correct approach to reduce the number of blind years, which is to be suffered by the patients. So a combination of different procedures with its accessibility can be of significant benefit for the patients. This session highlights the different options available and timely interventions with significant points during follow-up. The first speaker I would say in this session would be Dr. Rakhi Kusumesh. I would come at the last. She would be dealing with the suturing and ancillary procedures are to maximize outcomes. We have eminent speakers, Dr. Vibhuti, Mamta, and Dr. Abhishek. And over to you, Rakhi. Dr. Rakhi, please.
Yes, sir, I'm sharing this.
So Dr. Rakhi is presently working as an additional professor in the Cornea and Ocular Surface Unit of RIO IGMS at Patna. She is specialized in ocular surface disorders, all varieties of keratoplasty, special interest in pediatric diseases. She is authored more than 20 PubMed index publications, and she is also a reviewer of many national and international journals. She'll be dealing with the art of suturing, which is very important in corneal emergency situations. Dr. Rakhi, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for introduction and giving me this opportunity. I'll be speaking on suturing and ancillary procedures are to maximize visual outcome. Here, I'll cover the corneal part of trauma. I have no financial disclosures or conflict of interest. I'm sure all of us, no matter what specialty we work in, all of us see a lot of cases of ocular trauma in day-to-day practice. And if you see the socio-demographic status of India, then 30% of blind population of India lose their eyesight just because of ocular trauma, and they are under the age of 20 years. So it has become very important for us to have a great skill in managing these traumatic cases. Coming to evaluation and decision making, before proceeding to the surgery, we need to know what kind of injury we are dealing with, like penetration, perforation, or laceration. Or we need to prioritize the life-threatening injuries over the ocular trauma. We need to keep a history what treatment patient has been initiated before coming to us. And since these patients require general anesthesia for perforation repair, then we should keep a record of last meal. And since these patients are having a lot of medical legal issues, then we should know the condition of eye before the injury and we should document it. In examination, the visual acuity is very important. If it is not possible on some quantitative measurement, then we should go for accuracy of projection or perception and light. And sometimes even pupillary reflexes have become very important, particularly consensual light reflex if the case of unilateral trauma. Before planning for the surgery, we need to know the site and extent of the tear, whether it is limited to the cornea and going beyond to the cornea to manage these cases. And we also look for any evidence of infection to whether we need to have intracameral injection or intravitreal injection during the surgery. These patients should be advised for the use of protective shield to avoid any further damage in the eye, and always prepare a patient for general anesthesia along with the preparation for local anesthesia. And last not the least, radiological investigation in cases where we are suspecting any bony injury or any foreign body, then we should go for it, and documentation. These corneal trauma cases usually very evident on the torchlight, but for the decision making, it is very important to examine these patients under slit lamp examination to see whether there is a opening of the wound or not. So this is a first case which is just 2 to 3 millimeter in size, but it has associated with the Frank Seidels test. So this patient doesn't need any BCL or glue. It has to be done with suturing. This one is the case on the contrary to first one. It is also of the same side, but it was presented with it was having not the Frank Seidels test, but it has just a pressure Seidels test was positive in this case. So it can be easily healed with the BCL or by itself with or without glue. So in this case, we didn't do any suturing, and we just did cataract surgery after 2 months of healing of the wound. Third one is the small perforation located paracentrally and associated with lot of foreign bodies or dirt. So in these cases, we need to clear this margin of the perforation and remove all the dirt before suturing these cases. Now, keeping the function of the cornea in mind, our surgical goal should be directed towards to achieve the watertight wound closure to maintain the ocular integrity and restoration of normal anatomical relationship, restoration of optimal visual functions, and prevention of possible future complications. So with these goals, we should have basic instrumentation with us like Tenno monofilament Linol suture. And I would like to stress upon here that how to hold a needle. Needle should be held at the junction of 2/3 and 1/3 to a very smooth passage of needle through the corneal stroma at a proper depth and distance. Other than that, we should have vitrectomy, because most of the time these corneal traumas are not present in isolation. They are associated with many underlying traumatized tissue which need to be corrected at the same time. Now I would like to draw your attention towards the basic principle of corneal suturing to achieve the properly opposed wound edges without any incarceration of tissues, and to avoid wound distortion or any misalignment of wound that can result into irregular astigmatism. So first of all, suture placement. At the time of suture placement, the tip of needle should be perpendicular to the corneal surface, not at the entry site only, but also at the exit site. And their distance from the line of perforation should be equal on both the sides. Means A and B should be equal. Line of perforation to entry site and line of perforation to the exit site should be equal. The depth of the needle passage should be around 90% and should be equal on both sides of line of perforation. This is the actual ideal placement of the suture, and it should try to be close with it. If there are various type of incision we get during surgery. One is perpendicular incision, in which we follow the same principle as I told in the previous slide. A and B should be equal to approximately 90% of the depth to get a properly opposed wound. If we won't follow this principle, we can get a misalignment of wound. Another important parameter in closure of perpendicular incision or any other incision is the depth of suturing. If you are putting a depth very deeply, then it can cause cheese wiring and it allow the aqueous to come out and allows the organism to go inside and cause secondary infection. And if you are passing suture very shallow, then we may get a posterior wound gain. Another type of incision what we are getting is oblique incision. In this incision we actually follow the same principle like anterior aspect, A and B, the distance of entry wound to line of perforation or the exit wound to line of perforation should be equal, but not at the interior surface, but at the posterior surface. Here the posterior surface should be equal on the both the side of line of perforation to get the proper position of the suturing. Third is curvilinear incision. What is important in curvilinear incision is that it has two kind of incision. In center, it has a perpendicular orientation, and in the periphery, it has an oblique orientation. So in this case, once we put suture in the perpendicular part, means in the central part, the peripheral oblique part usually get sealed by themselves. So here they may need more suture in the peripheral part or may not. So this is a case of the curvilinear incision perforation. And here in center, I just gave one incision. Peripheral part was quite sealed, but since the patient was a child, I put more number of sutures to get a proper closure and safety. Another that one is toughest one is the stellate incision. Here many methods have been described in the literature to get the closure of these incision, but I find the closure of the peripheral arm first and then the management of the central part is the safest one and easiest one. So in this case, this is a case he came to us with the already suturing has been done. And in this case, the all suture knot was exposed. We just removed and we found slight tissue defect in the center. So we just gave first incision in the center and then started giving large suture in the periphery and then coming to center by giving a crisscross suture. But even after managing or giving so many sutures, we found that wound was leaky at the end of surgery, and we just put 1 drop of cyanoacrylate glue and found a very good result after 2 months of surgery. The corneal edema subsided and all sutures were well placed, and the patient has better visual outcome than before. Another very important caveat in corneal tear repairs is understanding the zone of compression. So when we give suture on the corneal surface, it creates a zone of compression, means cause a flattening all around it. And this zone of compression is in proportion to the suture length. If you're giving a small suture, then the zone of compression would be small. And if you're giving the large suture length, the zone of compression would be large. And what is important in that? So if you want to know leak in post-operative period or during intraoperative period, you need to have the overlapped zone of compression. Rather just being in touch, they should be overlapped. So in cases, actually it is done to avoid any wound leak. And this is also applied in a cases where the perforation is very large from limbus to limbus. Then in the periphery, we used to give a large suture with widely spaced, because large suture have a large zone of compression, so they can be widely spaced. And they cause peripheral compression and flattening. And we want slightly steepening in the center. So we just give small minimal tension sutures in the center, which are closely spaced to avoid any wound leak. So in this way, we can just try to maintain the contour of cornea as much as possible. Another very important thing while managing the corneal trauma is the suture bearing. At the time of suture bearing, we should keep in mind that not all knots should be very trimmed very short, and they should not be buried deep into the stroma, because you have to remove it after 2 months or after 6 months. You have to remove it, and you cannot bury it very deep in the stroma because it may cause so much of reaction, and it should not be buried in the wound line, because if you want to remove the suture at the end, it may cause wound opening. Last, if you have a tissue loss, then it may need some penetrating or lamellar grafts to close that wound. So points to retain in this presentation is the good understanding of principle of suturing is essential for achieving the surgical goal of corneal trauma repair. The simple interrupted sutures of appropriate length and depth are required to get a good optimal visual outcome. And an ideal initial surgical repair may eliminate the need for future reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Rakhi.
doctor.
Really, this was a really very nice summed up thing where you dealt with the different varieties of perforations. Basically, the ragged ones, how do you deal? Do you remove all the sutures after the corneal perforation repair routinely, or do you wait for the sutures to disintegrate and then only you remove? What's your approach?
All suture actually need to be removed, and the timing of suture is nearly 6 to 12 weeks. In pediatric cases, we remove suture nearly at 1 month when sutures are getting vascularized or loosened up, or lot of debris collected under the suture, then it has to be removed. Otherwise, all suture need to be removed before it disintegrates.
Was a very nicely presented. I mean, the astigmatism, everyone must have these things in back of his mind while doing a corneal suturing, corneal perforation repair, or any kind of a suturing, because these principles automatically play in, and that ultimately affects the visual outcome, either in the form of astigmatism or minimizing the astigmatism. So this was very nicely presented. So very quickly now, we would move to our next speaker, Dr. Vibhuti P. Sinha, who would be dealing with alternate sealing procedures, glues and lenses. So Vibhuti, could you share your screen, please? So Dr. Vibhuti Sinha is a pass out of Government Medical College, Jabalpur, and he's heading the Department of Ophthalmology, RIU in IGIMS. He completed his senior residency at RIU itself in 2002, and since then he has established himself over here and is heading the department. He was one of the youngest to become the professor and head of the department. He has been recognized by Times of India and Young Achiever Award of ISKIARIS and in Refractive Society Gold Medal in 2016. He has been awarded A.K. Prasad Gold Medal, served as an editor of Bihar Journal of Ophthalmology, presently Secretary of Bihar Ophthalmological Society, and he was a Chairman Scientific Committee of the Bihar Ophthalmological Society in the past. He's also a principal investigator of various multicentric trials, currently working on BIRAC DVT trial to create a trial-ready network all over India. So Dr. Vibhuti, come up with your topic.
So thank you, Dr. Nilesh Monsa, for giving me this opportunity. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll be talking on sealing the leaks, glues and lenses. These are very important armamentarium in cupboard of each of the ophthalmologists in the surgical operating rooms or in the OPD. Since it saves a lot of time and can manage a lot of unforeseen complications or lot of complications which need to be managed otherwise also. So I have no financial interest in any of the product mentioned here. So these are the contents. I'll be talking about introduction, types of adhesives, how to use them, the complications, and the newer tissue adhesives which are in pipeline along with the BSCL. So it was used off level for decades, first reported in 1963. With advancement in the formulation and technique, they have become important armamentarium. So what they do, they give us structural support as replacement or as complement to the suture, as shown by one of the video of Dr. Rakhi. So what are the ophthalmic uses of tissue adhesives? So it can be used as replacement or a complement to sutures, corneal perforation and bleb leaks, corneal thinning and desmatoseals. In cases of AMG applications or in the cases of pterygium surgery, it can be used. So there are two types. One is synthetic and the second one is biological. In the synthetic, N-butyl 2 cyanoacrylate is available, which is less expensive, easy to use and non-biodegradable. Whereas in cases of fibrin glue, which is biological, it is biodegradable kind of glue. So what should be the property of ideal glue? It should allow enough working time before it solidifies. Should be biocompatible. That means it should create less amount of reaction. Adequate. It should also provide adequate amount of tensile strength to the wound it has been applied, and that is the primary aim for which it is being applied. It should be permeable to fluids and metabolites to prevent necrosis. It should create a minimal amount of induced inflammation, just enough to create healing process underneath, but not in excess of inflammation. It should create, rather than if it creates excess of inflammation, then there will be a lot of vascularization and other related complication. Should not carry the risk of the disease transmission, and should be easily accessible and affordable also. So one by one, I'll be talking about. First one is the synthetic, that is N-butyl 2 cyanoacrylate. So there are two variants. One is used in ophthalmology, that is N-butyl 2 cyanoacrylate, whereas another one is used in the skin closures. How it acts? It polymerizes the rapidly ionic substances, such as when in contact comes with contact with the water or BSS, it polymerizes. It allows healing to proceed underneath the glue. It also provides significant amount of bacteriostatic properties. So in a way, it helps us in the healing process as well as control of inflammation and infection. Can only be used externally. If it goes internally into the anterior chamber, it will create a lot of inflammation. So it has to be thoroughly applied when the wounds is secured. The tensile strength of the bonding is one of the highest of the glue. So once you apply it, there will be mild eosinophilic reactions, which the reaction becomes minimal by 7th day, and the duration of glue adherence ranges from few days to more than 2 months. So it can dislodge from its own place, or it can stay at the place for even up to 2 months. How to use that? So there are two ways by which it can be applied. One is drop technique, and second one that a special applicator can be used. Like in this case, the video is not running, so I'll just explain that. So once you have to apply, you make sure that the anterior chamber is well formed. You can put anterior air bubble into the anterior chamber to push the iris back. If the opening or the perforation is small, 2 millimeter or less than 3 millimeter, we can apply it directly. But if it is little larger, then we have to naturally apply sutures to give a kind of meshwork, and over it the glue can be applied. Or we can use a kind parchment paper like kind of thing, or a different kind of opaque piece of glue, so that once you apply it, a drop is put on the perforated area, it polymerizes, and then once it polymerizes, the anterior chamber become well formed. And at the end of the procedure, we can apply the bandage contact lenses, so that the foreign body sensation does not occur to the patient. Now, what are the complications? So there will be dislodgement of the glue, so we should be ready with reapplication of the glue, or we can have to change the procedure of treatment. We can have to shift to application of sutures or some other material to actually close the perforation. It can cause GPC, it can cause secondary glaucoma, stromal neovascularization occur, and also cause secondary inflammation or bacterial infection if the glue or BSCL is left for very prolonged duration. The second one is fibrin glue, which is biodegradable, and it is approved by FDA for achieving homeostasis. And in the corneal perforation, it was first published in 2001 in the cornea, and since then it is being applied for corneal perforations. So there are 2 vials, 4 vials, and the 2 vials, the blue vials, are having sealer protein concentrate, and that has to be mixed with the fibrinolysis inhibitors. And then the thrombin has to be activated by use of the calcium chloride. And then when these 2 glues are 2 portions are applied, it forms a fibrin glue, and that's way it can act like a glue. So when we compare the cyanoacrylate glue with the fibrin glue, in cases of cyanoacrylate glue, it provides more deeper stromal, it creates more stromal neovascularization, whereas fibrin glue is less reactive. The stay is more with the cyanoacrylate glue in comparison to the fibrin glue, and the rate of healing is nearly equal in both glue, cyanoacrylate as well as fibrin glue. Howsoever, the cyanoacrylate glue is easily available and it costs little less also, so can be utilized for perforation, smaller kind of perforations. So advantage is to reduce the total surgical time when you put a suture, few sutures, and then apply the glue, and over that the BSCL, it reduces the total surgical time. It is better tolerated, non-toxic, better antimicrobial activity when compared to the cyanoacrylate glue, lowers the risk of the post-operative wound infection, and a smooth seal along the entire length of the wound edge results in the higher tensile strength. Having said that, it has the chances of reactivity also, so one should be cautious in application of that. And it can also have the risk of transmitted disease, especially the viral disease. These glues are expensive also. Now there are certain newer tissue adhesives which are in pipeline also, like polyethylene glycol, acrylic copolymer tissue adhesives, biodendrimers, dendritic macromers, or photo cross linkable adhesives like riboflavin based adhesives which are used in the C3R, and it can also be used for the drug delivery in the futures. So to conclude my presentation, I'll say that this is the choice of material as adjuvant in the routine cases or emergency. So it should be there in the armamentarium of each of the ophthalmic surgeon. Each glue has its unique property and limitations. So one should be aware of these properties as well as limitations and where to apply. Need to use them as per the need. So we have to identify where we can apply, where we can't apply. But overall, these glues work well below 3 millimeter of the perforation. Better to be used below 2 millimeter of the perforation, or if there is a larger perforation, we can use that along with the sutures. And scope is still open for the newer tissue adhesives with the more ideal properties. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vibhuti. It was a very nice and comprehensive presentation and information regarding the types of glues, which is used as an adjuvant therapy in all smaller perforations, also as adjuvant to corneal sealing procedures where you have a leak and all those. So what's your opinion? I mean, would you prefer to use the synthetic glue more or the cyanoacrylate one?
The cyanoacrylate, as far as my experience goes, I have used more like a cyanoacrylate glue, and they works well with sub 2 millimeter perforations. They are not to be preformed. They comes in the preformed vials in the unims, and they can be applied very easily. Whereas in cases of fibrin glue, it has to be prepared well, before the actual application. And my experience goes with more with the cyanoacrylate glue.
I think the more availability is cheaper and more easy availability of cyanoacrylate makes its use being more widespread. But yes, the synthetic one is costlier, but definitely it has got advantages in other procedures.
The fibrin glue can be used in cases of AMG and other procedures.
AMG and all.
Fibrin glue comes in more
wider. Yeah. So thank you, Vibhuti, for your very nice presentation. So very quickly now we will move to our next topic, where Dr. Mamta would be dealing with ways and means to handle acute eye drops, which comes as an emergency. So Dr. Mamta, can you share your
Yes, sir. Sure.
So,
is this visible, sir? Yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Mamta is a senior ophthalmologist doing senior residency in PMCH at Patna. She did her D-Opthal from RIO Chennai and DNB from Vadodara, and did her fellowship in cornea and refractive surgery from Ahmedabad. She has a special interest in corneal surgeries, corneal transplantations, and ocular surface surgeries. She is presently also the editor proceedings of Bihar Ophthalmological Society, and she's also the member editorial board of Eastern India Zonal Ophthalmological Congress, the Eastern Zone IZOC body. So Mamta, come up with your presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. My slides, okay, right. So I will be talking about one of the corneal catastrophes, that is acute corneal eye drops, and how to go about its management. We'll start with one of the clinical case. A 9-year-old boy came to us with marked diminution of vision, right eye, for the last 3 days. And he has this appearance of white spot in the affected eye for the last 3 days. We can see the clinical picture of the patient of the affected eye on the right side of the slide. This patient gives history of irregular treatment for ocular allergy. This is the OCT picture of the same eye, same day. We can see there is a tear at the Descemet membrane and there is a fluid left in the corneal stroma. Based on this OCT picture, our diagnosis was corneal eye drops. This is the topographic picture of the other eye of the patient, which was suggestive of keratoconus. So based on these two, our clinical diagnosis was both eye keratoconus with right eye acute corneal eye drops. So what exactly is corneal eye drops? It is a cloudy swelling of cornea due to entrance of aqueous in corneal stroma through a tear in Descemet's membrane. And it can be seen not only in cases of keratoconus, but also after keratoglobus, PMD, Terrien's marginal degeneration, post-refractive surgery, ectasia, or even after keratoplasties. The important risk factors for development of corneal eye drops are younger age of the patient, male gender, advanced corneal ectasia, poor corrected cells visual acuity, severe allergic eye disease, traumatic contact lens use, and Down syndrome. Depending on the extent of corneal edema in corneal eye drops, the eye drops can be graded as grade 1 when the edema is localized within a circle of central 3 mm. Grade 2 when it is beyond 3 mm but within a circle of 5 mm. And grade 3 when it is beyond the 5 mm diameter. And not only anterior segment OCT, but also uveum has got important value when it comes to diagnosis and prognostic value of prognosis of eye drops. And it was well documented by Sharma et al. In the year 2011. They advocated the measurement of mean length of Descemet membrane tear by UBM, then measurement of corneal thickness overlying the tear 2 mm from the central point and at the periphery, and the ratio of thickness at 2.5 mm to thickness overlying the tear. They named it as eye drops resolving index. And they advocated the serial measurement of this eye drops resolving index in cases of corneal eye drops. Coming to management of corneal eye drops, there are two options. One is conservative treatment, another is surgical. In conservative treatment, mainly we go for hypertonic sodium chloride to reduce epithelial edema, cycloplegic agent to relieve the ciliary spasm, anti-glaucoma medication to decrease the hydrodynamic pressure over the posterior surface of cornea, topical steroid in cases of large eye drops, especially when it is near the limbus and there would be more of inflammation in those cases, more chances of neovascularization. In those cases, it is important. Bandage contact lens can be given to the patient for comfort. And the studies, they have reported the average time of healing somewhere between 4 weeks to 36 weeks for complete resolution of this corneal edema. So we can say it's really a long time it takes to heal on its own. And the important prognostic factor for this is the area of corneal involvement. Larger would be the area of involvement, more time it will take for resolution. And continuity with the limbus. If it is in continuation with the limbus, there would be more chance of scar formation and vascularization. Important complications related to it is bacterial keratitis, especially if the epithelial is compromised, corneal perforation, scarring with vascularization. And that is where the role of surgical treatment for eye drops is. The options are pneumodesmetopexy with intracameral injection of air or gas, different gases can be used. Then compressive sutures along with pneumodesmetopexy and OCT guided intrastromal fluid drainage with hair tamponade. Another option is predesmetic DALK and penetrating keratoplasty. Next, we have cyanoacrylate glue along with BCL application, and then AMG with cauterization. We'll start with pneumodesmetopexy. This unrolls the ruptured Descemet membrane and acts as a tamponade to prevent aqueous humor penetration into the stroma. And the agents which are used are air, non-expansile volume of C3F8, sulfur hexafluoride, and C2F6. All these can be used. And the comparative study between conservative treatment and pneumodesmetopexy, all of them, they have reported earlier resolution of eye drops with pneumodesmatoplexy. Then comes the role of compression suture along with pneumodesmatoplexy. The idea is to bring the edges together with the help of these compression sutures. So we put 2 to 4 full thickness compression suture across the tear after intracameral gas injection. And Rajaraman et al., they have reported a case series of 15 patients where they used C3F8 along with compression suture, and the reported average time of resolution of edema was 8.87 with standard deviation of 4.98 days. There are certain complications related to pneumodesmatoplexy, like if there is a large descemet membrane break, then there is a chance of intrastromal migration of gas bubble. This leads to delayed resolution of corneal hydrops. Then there is always a risk of pupillary block and IOP rise. Anterior capsule cataract formation has been reported due to surgical trauma and due to presence of gas in the anterior chamber. Next comes the intrastromal fluid drainage with air tamponade. This has been published by RPC group. So what they have recommended, they put multiple corneal stromal venting incision over the site of fluid pockets, and this would be under OCT guidance. And this, along with the anterior chamber tamponade, acts in faster resolution of hydrops. Pretesmatic DALK, here we will be doing DALK, but we will be leaving a small area of corneal stroma here at this site, at the site of tear. So this provides early and rapid visual rehabilitation, early anatomical rehabilitation, and optical correction by regaining corneal structure and transparency. Penetrating keratoplasty when nothing else is working. Other procedures which have been used are acute corneal hydrops with fistula. In those cases, we can use tissue glue and BCL as other speakers have recommended. Then in cases of persistent corneal edema, this has been used in cases of Down syndrome in mentally retarded patients. Cauterization under saline irrigation. This cauterization will cause rapid evaporation of the fluid. And this along with stromal puncture and AMT to cover the inflammation or to cover the inflammatory component of this entire picture. This has worked well. So what we did in our case was we put air in the anterior chamber with the help from a side port, and then we put 4 compression sutures along this. At the end, we repeated the air tamponade and we put a BCL. This is the 3rd day postoperative picture of the patient. We can see the edema has reduced a lot. This is the OCT picture. We can see the fluid pocket also has gone down in size. This is the day 7 picture. We can see only small bit of fluid left is left at the posterior stroma. And sutures, they have started loosening up due to resolution of corneal edema. This is day 21. We can see the fluid left is gone completely. And this is the 1.5 month postoperative picture. We can see the drastic change in the appearance. We should never forget the management of other eye, because that also can ultimately end up having the similar situation. So that eye was given treatment for allergic conjunctivitis, corneal cross-linking, and serial topography. So to conclude, anterior segment OCT and UVM both have got diagnostic and prognostic value in corneal hydrops. The surgical intervention of acute corneal hydrops leads to early resolution of corneal edema. Basic and associated ocular pathology like ocular allergy in this particular case, and the other eye should be treated accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mamta. It was a nice talk. I was off in between for a net glitch. So really, I mean, it was a different way of handling the hydrops. This is also one of the emergencies which is really painful and really needs attention and a quick recovery. What you mentioned was that a delayed recovery can be hastened off by doing these procedures.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any extra point would you like to highlight, or some problems which you feel like in this?
The only thing is we need to be really vigilant, because most of these patients, they are pediatric age group. These days, pediatric keratoconus presenting as hydrops, I am seeing very often because of allergic response and continuous eye rubbing. They have this habit. Okay. So that is something needs to be controlled. That is something needs to be emphasized whenever the patient comes for follow-up, whenever the patient comes for treatment. Eye rubbing has to be stopped.
So well presented, Dr. Mamta. Thank you. I
Thank you
think
so much, sir.
most people must be benefited of that. So now, Dr. Abhishek Ranjan, please, with your next talk. The surgical strike in chemical injury.
Very good afternoon to all of you. I'm sharing the screen. Is it the screen is visible? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay. So a very good afternoon. So I have no financial interest in any of the products shown in this talk. So chemical injury constitutes 20 to 30% of all ocular injuries. It happens when a corrosive substance is accidentally introduced to the eye or periocular tissue. It is true ophthalmic emergency that require immediate and intensive intervention to minimize severe complications and profound visual loss. It is most.
Yeah, Dr. Abhishek.
Yes, sir.
I'm back continue with your presentation. I was off.
It is most prevalent among young males aged between 20 to 40 years, but children are also at risk. So there are various substances which are used on day-to-day basis which may cause these injuries. In home settings like cleaning solutions, drain cleaners, oven cleaners, bleach and battery explosion, and in an industrial setting like lime and various acids are the offending agents. In acute clinical settings, we can find periorbital edema and erythema, deepithelialized skin, loss of eyelashes and eyebrows, corneal and conjunctival epithelial defects, chemosis, conjunctival inflammation, limbal ischemia, corneal cloudiness, edema, and occasionally corneal or scleral perforation. Others findings may be cataract, high intraocular pressure, or secondary damage to retina or optic nerve. One of the most important prognostic factors for visual outcome is the extent of ocular surface damage, initially reflected by the amount of limbal ischemia. And according to that, there are two classifications are there. The older one are Roper Hall classification, which is divided into 4 grades according to the corneal injuries and limbal ischemia. While Dr. Dua has classified chemical injury into 6 grades according to the limbal involvement in clock hours and percentage of conjunctival involvement. Hence, the common element in all these classifications scheme is the amount of limbal involvement at the time of injury, and relative proportion of surviving limbal tissue is a major prognostic factor. So the course of the disease is divided into 4 physiological phases. So in immediate phase, first we have to irrigate thoroughly the ocular surface to remove any offending agent. For this, use of at least 2 liters of irrigating solution. Then recheck pH, which should be around 7, and there is correlation between time to irrigation and outcome. Hence, it is important to check and sweep the furnaces to remove any particulate matter also. So there are various solutions can be used in immediate phase, like tap water is also good. Others are like buffered solutions, normal saline, ringer lactate, or amphoteric solutions. In acute phase, the main objective during are to decrease the inflammation, avoid further epithelial and stromal breakdown, and foster reepithelialization. So anti-inflammatory therapy like topical corticosteroids are critical in controlling acute inflammation and reducing the resulting inflammatory damage to the ocular surface after a chemical injury. To inhibit the surge of neutrophilic infiltration, it should be started immediately after chemical injury. Intense regimen of any potent steroid on hourly basis for grade 2 or higher chemical injuries should be done. It should be tapered down by 2 weeks in the setting of non-healing epithelial defect. But if the cornea has epithelialized, topical corticosteroids can be used safely beyond 2 weeks. If necessary, systemic corticosteroids can be considered. Stromal melt or thinning is a major concern in severe chemical injury because there are no viable cells to repair, and inflammatory cells secreting matrix metalloproteinases are there. So to prevent corneal thinning after chemical injuries, we can use collagenase inhibitors like tetracycline or vitamin C, or protease inhibitors like citrate. For promotion of reepithelialization, frequent preservative-free lubricants should be applied along with prophylactic antibiotic. Any toxic medications like gentamicin should be avoided. Bandage contact lens can be applied in acute phase like soft bandage contact lens, and in chronic stage, scleral lenses can be applied. Amniotic membrane transplantation is a permanent surgical graft to provide a basement membrane for epithelialization. It acts as biological bandage contact lens. In ocular burns, it provides pain relief and rapid epithelialization in moderate grade burns. It also helps in the restoration of corneal surface with preservation of good vision and reducing limbal stromal infiltration. It helps in restoring the conjunctival surface by limiting symbiotic formation. Amniotic membrane grafting during the first 7 to 10 days following acute injury maximizes the beneficial effects. There is a technique of application of amniotic membrane. First, we have to remove all the debris and devitalized tissues all around, and then amniotic membrane should be spread over the ocular surface, and it should be fixed with the help of fibrin glue to the ocular surface, including the fornices and up to the lid margin. Autologous serum and platelet-rich plasma are also helps in promotion of reepithelialization because they have higher concentration of growth factors. Tenonplasty are used in severe injuries that cause loss of limbal vascularity and subsequent anterior segment necrosis to re-establish the limbal blood supply and to promote ocular surface repair. It may be combined with amniotic membrane transplantation with or without lumbar corneal patch grafting. It prevents anterior segment necrosis, scleral ischemia, melting, and strial ulceration. So for this technique, first we have to remove all the necrotic and devitalized tissues, including conjunctiva and tenons, until we reach to the vascular tissue. And once we reach the vascular tenon, it should be advanced and fixed with the help of fibrin glue to the ocular surface. In chronic phase, the goal of surgical intervention is to restore normal ocular surface anatomy and visual function. The typical order for surgical intervention are correction of eyelid abnormalities, management of glaucoma, ocular surface reconstruction or transplantation, and then keratoplasty. So ocular surface exposure due to loss of eyelid tissue or contacture or symblepharon are the major contributing factor to control complications, including ulceration and perforation. Hence, eyelid and fornix abnormalities should be corrected before any limbal or corneal surgery is performed. It should be delayed as long as possible in order to avoid surgery on hot eyes. In mild to moderate symblepharon, excision of tenons and preservation of conjunctiva should be done. Fornix reconstruction with amniotic membrane can be done, and antimetabolites such as mitomycin C or 5-fluorouracil should be applied to deep fornices. In severe and extensive symblepharon, in unilateral cases, autologous conjunctival graft from the fellow eyes, or in bilateral or extensive disease, mucous membrane grafting can be considered. Limbal stem cell deficiency is characterized by corneal conjunctivalization, corneal neovascularization, persistent epithelial defect and ulceration, corneal scarring, severe visual loss, and chronic pain. So its management strategy is based on severity and laterality. In case of partial LSCD, if central cornea is spared, then preservative-free lubricants are used along with autologous serum, eye drops, and topical vitamin A plus and steroids. If the central cornea is involved, then sequential sector conjunctival epithelectomy, amniotic membrane transplantation can be done. If all the above fail, then ipsilateral limbal transplant in the form of claw or slit can be done. In unilateral diseases, claw can be done, or slit or cleft can be done. While in bilateral diseases, all this can be done with the help of living-related allograft. Limbal stem cell transplantation are not recommended during active inflammation. It should be delayed until ocular surface inflammation has subsided or is well controlled with the medications. All eyelid abnormalities should be addressed before considering limbal stem cell transplant. That is the technique of claw. First, we have to release the symblepharon, and then all the fibrotic tissues are removed. Then conjunctival limbal graft is taken from other side and it should be placed over the bare area. Taking the precaution that limbal side should be limbus and it is fixed with the help of fibrin glue. In SLATE, first we have to remove the pannus from the cornea and all around it. And then we have to put amniotic membrane over that. And this amniotic membrane should be fixed with the help of fibrin glue. And the other limbal tissues that is harvested from the other eye or from the living related donor should be applied over that, and it should be cut over about 8 to 10 pieces, and it should be arranged in peri-limbal area and fixed with fibrin glue, and then bandage contact lens are applied. These are the outcomes of SLATE. In living related conjunctival yellow graft requires performing surgery on two patients, donor and recipient. It supplies goblet cells in transplanted conjunctival carrier tissue. Keratolimbal autograft involves transplantation of limbal stem cell from cadaver donor tissue in the form of corneoscleral tissue lenticule. In limbal stem cell transplantation in allogenic LSCT, it needs comprehensive and full systemic immunosuppression, either steroid, tacrolimus, or mycophenolate mofetil. Corneal transplantation can be considered in extensive stromal scarring after chemical injuries. Keratoprosthesis is the surgical placement of artificial cornea, and Boston type 1 keratoprosthesis is the most widely used device for restoring vision in patients who have failed previous corneal procedure. Boston type 2 K-Pro or osteodontal prosthesis are usually reserved for patients with bilateral corneal blindness in the setting of severe dryness and keratinization and severe chemical or physical injury with loss of lids. In patients with residual tear film, other surgical interventions should be considered prior to Boston type 2 K-Pro or OOKP implantation. So these are the algorithm or summarized management of in chronic phases. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek, for an extensive and elaborate management of the chemical burns. Chemical injury is one of the important aspect of acute emergencies in ophthalmology. So very frequently clinicians do encounter some kind of things spilling into the eye, and the immediate that has got long-term immediate effects as well as the long-term catastrophic effects. So thank you so much for your nice and elaborate presentation. So lastly, at the end of the session, I think it's with my talk. I'll be presenting penetrating keratoplasty, a savior in distress. So till now, what we have seen is all the different procedures, different things which have been mentioned, suturing procedures, use of glue, but yes, penetrating keratoplasty at the end comes as a savior in distress when all the things fail. So as we all know, ocular trauma is a very important cause of unilateral blindness, especially in young people, male-female ratio being 4:1 because of the occupational part, because of their being more outdoor. Infectious keratitis, as already mentioned, is also a very frequent cause of emergency hospital admissions, and identifying causative organisms promptly is very important to avoid vision-threatening outcomes. Otherwise, things go downhill. Common pathogens including staph, Foglase negative staph, Pseudomonas, filamentous fungi, Acanthamoeba. These all are the things which lead to acute emergencies in infectious diseases. Post-LASIK microbial keratitis is also of concern if it is not being managed conservatively and it is going downhill. A cosmetic surgery usually going downhill becomes very difficult to manage. Then you need to have something to do in hand, and ultimately keratoplasty comes into play when everything fails and corneal melting occurs. So when these situations go downhill, what do we think that whether the line of therapy was wrong or inadequate therapy was there, or some kind of a drug resistance of toxicity is playing a part. So unable to understand, you rethink and rethink. Now, in the thing, perforations which has been discussed, variety of perforations do come, smaller perforations as was already discussed. If it is less than 2 millimeters, you do a gluing. But indication for suturing is usually for perforations greater than 2 millimeters, or there is a displacement of the flap, or there is a loss of tissue. If there is a tissue loss, you can go for a conjunctival patch graft or a Tieman's patch graft, smaller perforations. If the perforation is even smaller, you can have an amniotic membrane graft option apart from the chemical injury, its use in chemical injuries. Now, this patch graft is very important when the perforation is more than 3 millimeters and direct suturing is not very feasible. Even if you do not have the corneal tissues, you can suture it with a sclera. And suturing at this point becomes very important because usually the location of the tissue loss is important, whether it is centrally located or is it eccentric, because the repair may have a long-term visual outcome later on because of astigmatism and all. But patch graft comes into play when the perforation becomes larger than 3 millimeter and having a tissue loss. Collagen cross-linking is used in those cases where you have infectious cases which are not responding. You give a try for that before going into resorting for penetrating keratoplasty. So when you resort to penetrating keratoplasty, as you all know, either it can be tectonic therapeutic or it can be an optical one when the things have healed up. Though resorting to penetrating keratoplasty, it's not a procedure devoid of risks. Risk factors of risk of graft rejection is always there, with a high risk factor of young recipient. If there is a pre-existing more than 2 quadrants of vascularization, if you have used a large diameter corneal graft for a larger corneal melt or a larger perforation, if there is a pre-existing glaucoma or a presence of a pre-existing inflammation. These all factors, apart from resorting to penetrating keratoplasty, have a greater chance of graft rejection in future. Penetrating keratoplasty is not an easy thing to go, and you have intraoperative challenges while doing the surgery. Trephine related, either you have irregular trephining of the host or the donor tissue. You can have inadvertent surgical trauma to the ocular tissues while you're doing, because once you are resorting to this procedure in those corneal emergency cases where things have not gone well medically, they are very friable. So inadvertent surgical trauma to ocular tissues do occur. Anterior chamber hemorrhage can follow after the trauma to the iris by the trephine or while debridement of the tissues. Even expulsive suprachoroidal hemorrhage, which is one of the greatest risks because it's an open glow while you have opened the host. The risk factors are more often the elderly patients or having atherosclerosis, or they have a sudden rise of IOP due to sudden coughing or something. So this is a risk factor when we are dealing with penetrating keratoplasty. It's not devoid of postoperative complications in the early phase where you have suture-related complications, delayed epithelial healing, chances of infections, postoperative spike of IOP, and a primary graft failure. In the late phases, you can have wound dehiscence, formation of cataract, glaucoma being very common, astigmatism very common. Graft vascularization can occur depending upon the pre-existing quadrant of vascularization. And in later phases, if the patient is more prone to graft rejection, even it can go to graft rejections. So it's not devoid of postoperative complications. So resorting to penetrating keratoplasty certainly shouldn't be the option, but it should be the distressed option. There can be a primary donor failure itself where the graft had never been cleared postoperatively due to an unhealthy donor endothelium, or due to the surgical trauma induced while placing the graft. So primary donor failure can occur even if you have done a corneal transplantation. Postoperative management is very meticulous because you have to be very careful in the postoperative course. You have to see the integrity of the wound and sutures, status of the surface, anterior chamber activity, what's the IOP following in the postoperative course, signs of any infection or rejection. Those things are to be followed up very meticulously along with the routine postoperative medications. Graft rejection, as I told you, that it's always there, the risk of graft rejection is always there. Every graft reaction does not proceed to graft rejection if identified timely. Definitely, it can be the graft can be preserved. So, in the end, I would say that definitely you have this armamentarium of penetrating keratoplasty with you when all the things fail. But yes, resorting immediately to penetrating keratoplasty is not very cakewalk. It is full of complications, full of meticulousness, full of things to be cared of. But yes, when no other options are there, it is the only rescuing thing which you have to carry along in the situation of corneal emergencies where you are not being able to do anything with any other procedures. So thank you with this. And with this, I think we come to the end of this session. I think we have completed this part of the session. So this was a very nice session and every talk was very crisp. Right from suturing techniques to the ancillary procedures like utilization of glues, any special thing which we have, which we should keep in mind, apart from all which we have discussed. Any of the speakers can put in their viewpoints. We have time and we can discuss a few things because we have tried to maximize the things clinicians deal in their clinical practice in their day-to-day clinical practice. So whatever modalities they have access to, they should utilize those things, because penetrating keratoplasty is a procedure which is usually done at tertiary centers. It's not available at the peripheral centers, or so you have to have all the alternatives with you when you're dealing with corneal emergencies. So any viewpoint with the speakers? Any special comments?
I feel something basic like suturing procedure needs to be very emphasized, especially at the level of post-graduation and all, because that is something which we all tackle. Even at the periphery also, doctors get all these cases of trauma, corneal suturing where they need to do.
What I feel that suturing part for the level of postgraduates or any clinicians, people are resorting to sutureless things. So these kind of emergencies are the kind of patients who require the most attention, usually are children, and an inappropriate suturing at the first time. If you revise the sutures or do a revision, that procedure does not give that kind of an outcome when the primary thing has been done very neatly. So the understanding of the dynamics of the techniques of different variety of wounds, like a lacerated one or a slashed one. So what should be the suture depth? What should be the suture width? These part are, I think, very important aspect to give a good visual outcome, because a child of a 5-year-old child, and if you just give a very bad scar, the outcome, amblyopic outcome, is bound to occur. So, Dr. Vibhuti, I think this is one point which we wanted to highlight. I mean, for everyone, as well as especially for the postgraduate also, because perforations, they take it as if it has to be done.
And one of the most important thing is timely removal of the sutures also. As Rakhi has mentioned, I would like to hear from her again. What should be the particular time when in early childhood, if suppose trauma occurs and we have repaired, and it is in the visual axis, what is the actual time when we should remove these sutures, as we need to minimize the inflammation, inciting inflammation because of sutures, and that will reduce the scar formation also, a larger scar formation.
Yes, sir, to increase the visual outcome and to get better visual outcome in younger kids, it's always better to remove the suture early, because these people, the younger kids, usually have a very intense fibrotic reaction and lot of healing power. So suture generally heals within a month. So in a very young kid, like less than 15 days or less than, though the trauma is not very common in this age group, but still, if the trauma occurs and we do corneal suturing, then it should be removed within 3 or 4 weeks, not more than that. And if the trauma is corneal suturing we are doing in the pupillary axis or visual axis, then it should be slightly shallower, not very deep, so that it cannot give a very deep and dense scar. And peripheral part would be the deep and large sutures. Otherwise, in adults, it can be removed after 6 weeks to get a good, after getting the good strength of the cornea.
As a matter of fact, one point I would like to highlight is that while corneal suturing in the central zone or in any area, the instrumentation and the needle sharpness, these two things are very important while you are giving a bite. Because while you are giving the bite, you want to minimize the tissue trauma, as you said that you want to give it superficially when it is central. So that part becomes very important, so that you can move in through a single-handed bite on the both lips, and then you come around and adjust the tightness. That becomes very important when you want to adjust it with the astigmatism later on.
And one more thing, keep the knot size very small, not the bigger one, because it can give an intense reaction as well as the deep scar to the tissue.
And Dr. Abhishek, do you feel like use of AMG in early cases of chemical injury, or you usually wanted to use it in always in a late case?
No, in early cases, it's
Early,
always
how
will
early?
be- It's a,
Or late or how late?
within a week, it would be fine. Otherwise, within a month, it works. But at least within a month, it should be done. Best result you will get if you will done, it's within a week.
I would say that amniotic membrane grafting should be done as early as
As
possible.
early.
Yeah, as early as possible,
If
yeah.
their medical condition is good enough to go for under GA, then it should be done on the day 1, day 2, or day 3.
I think, we want to prevent the formation of the scarring tissues as a symblepharon or the ankyloblepharon or whatever, scarring tissues post-chemical injury. You want to avoid that because that's bound to occur in the coming phase. So I think the approach to use AMG should be sooner the patient permits.
Especially in grade 3 and grade 4 chemical injury, I guess, as early as possible should be removed.
Even in
Because
grade
the more you delay, the scarring part comes in very fast, and then
Yes.
you land up into multiple sitting procedures as well as affecting the long-term outcome.
Yes.
So that is one important thing, and I think we have discussed majority of the
Most
things
of the things, yeah.
directly in this session. So I thank all of you with your
Thank you, sir.
excellent participation and covering the topic in a very detailed manner, and had a good discussion with the practical tips and practical part of it. So with this, we come to the end of the session, and